Thank you all. So I'm going to begin. Oh, we don't have any fancy. I'm going to begin by lighting our chalice with matches. So one moment while I do that. And our chalice lighting words, we gather in the knowledge that we will make mistakes, that we will sometimes disagree, but that we hold the truth of love and commitment at the center. So thank you so much for being here today. My name is Reverend Sara Lewis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Community and Faith Development here at OUUC. And this is part 2 of a 2-part training on facilitation and conflict management skills. So if you weren't here for last week, we went over different skills for facilitating, different skills for leading a group process, whether that might be a team, a committee, the board, a small group ministry group, or an informal circle of friends, or a reflection circle. It's really applicable across different types of groups. And so that'll be true as we move into conflict as well. That these are skills that are applicable across all kinds of human relationship constellations. If anyone has any questions or has follow-up, do feel free to email me later. And my email and phone number are on the website. So, if I could get the slides up, Carbon. We had a little bit of unfinished business from last week. So where we ended last week was on these topics, the common types of difficult participants. And we did cover techniques for the dominator and the quiet one last week. So now we'll talk some about these other 3 types of difficult participants before we move into conflict. And before I get much further, I would love to ask for a volunteer who would be willing to run around the second microphone when we... Karen, thank you so much. So to make sure that everyone can hear us, let's make sure we all use the microphone. So, common types of difficult participants. There are, of course, other types of difficult participants besides these that I've listed here. And I do want to lift up again that just because we're saying that this is a type of difficult participant doesn't mean that this is a bad person. Like, we all are difficult. We're human, right? I'm difficult, you're difficult, we're difficult at different times and under different scenarios. You don't want to see me if I haven't had my lunch. You know, these are the things. Yeah, coffee for some of us, exactly. And I want to lift up as well that as we're going through our conversations about conflict, about difficult people, that let's talk in generalities and let's not lift up specific scenarios that we are working on that people would recognize what we're talking about. If you want help on a specific person that you have trouble working with, or a specific scenario that you're currently working through, I would be happy to work on that with you one-on-one with some confidentiality, but let's not do it in an open forum setting. Does that sound good, everyone? Yeah. So when you look at this list of types, if there are some faces and names that are immediately jumping to mind, keep that to yourself. Yeah. So I'm going to go through maybe Yep. Okay. So whenever you're working with difficult participants, the first step in all scenarios, no matter what, is that we want to start with covenant and ground rules. And we do this with all of our groups. We encourage that every group set its own covenant. But of course, we also have our OUUC covenant as well, which whether or not we have set covenant, always operating under our OUUC covenant. So groups covenants are in addition to the OUUC covenant. And we're going to skip through the dominator and the quiet one. If you're super curious, the recording from last week is on the website and the YouTube channel. But now we're going to come to the rambler. So reasons why a person might ramble. They could be an external processor. It could be that talking things through is how they organize their thoughts and come to their own conclusions. And so they need to talk it. They need to talk out loud to think. They could also be having some memory or focus problems. It could be that they're struggling with their own ability to order their thoughts and remember things. It could be that they're nervous and that they just start to ramble when they get nervous. So there's lots of ways. Yeah, absolutely. Sit when you're not needed. Yeah, thank you. So keeping that in mind and being compassionate for why people might ramble, there is also, of course, reasons why we don't want rambling, because it takes too much time, it gets us off track, we just don't have the capacity to give that much airtime to one person and still allot enough time for everyone else. So here's a few techniques that you can use to manage ramblers. You can set time allotments on your agenda. So instead of just putting 5 things on the agenda, say we have 10 minutes for this one and 20 minutes for that one. And so then you keep on track with your agenda and the 10-minute thing doesn't turn into a 45-minute thing and end up eating up the whole agenda. You can also be strategic in your ordering on the agenda. So if you know that one topic or one presenter is going to likely cause some rambling, you can put that item later on the agenda, so important things that you wanted to make sure got done before you got to that. There's also something else that you could do with agenda setting, which is if you're really, particularly if you're trying to get a report out from someone who frequently rambles, is you could put bullet points of what you want to hear about. So if you're asking for a report back on the project to restore the doors, you could put on the bullet point, budget, progress of the actual doors, how many bids, you could put, so that then you're helping them organize their thoughts as they give their report. You're giving them a little scaffolding, a little help. So that is also a tool that you can apply. If you're giving like a check-in opportunity, or you want to hear from everyone and you know that you have ramblers, you can use a timer. You can say, we're checking in and everyone gets 2 minutes. And when the timer goes off, your time is up. If you don't use your whole time, that's okay, we'll just move on. So you can set a device that will cut people off if they're gonna keep going. And then you can also interrupt and redirect directly. You can say, I'm sorry, we are out of time for this, I need us to move on. We're going to switch to the next item. Or, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what we really needed to hear from you was, are we on budget or not? Can you tell us that? So you can either redirect the person back to what you were hoping to hear, or you can redirect back to the process and just move on to the next thing on the agenda. So here I'm going to pause, and now this is where running around may be helpful. Any thoughts or questions from either online participants or folks in the room? Anybody have anything that rises up? All right, Arlene, I'm on this side.
Oh, one of the things we do in I go to 12-step meetings, and one of the things we do is when someone is rambling, a few of us will just pop up, "Thank you, Bob." "Thanks, John." And if you get at least one other person to say thanks with you, then the person gets a message that, yeah, they need to move on.
Yeah. Yeah, just saying thank you. You've shared. Yeah. Anything else for anyone? James.
Isn't it possible to set up conditions in the rules to hopefully remind people not to ramble?
Absolutely. Yeah, your ground rules, your covenant can have some conditions in it, particularly around, sharing the airtime, take space, make space. It might not help the people who don't realize they're rambling, but it does help to have that expectation already in place.
So you could just ask someone to be the timer. 5 minutes, we'll let you know in 4 minutes. And then
Yeah, this is another place where facilitators don't have to do everything. So you could ask somebody else to be timekeeper and keep time. Yeah. Do we have something online, Carbon? Okay, I misread your signal. All right, well, let's move on from before I ramble to the complainer. So, reasons why people might complain. They have a genuine concern that people need to hear. There's something important to hear. They have been having a personally hard time and are feeling kind of dysregulated about things, and so their patience is frayed or their tolerance for things is frayed. Other reasons why people could be perceived as the complainer is because of actually power differentials, and it's very typical for a group of people with more power and privilege to perceive what people with less power and privilege are saying as just complaining. So it's important not to put the complainer down, because that might actually be perpetuating patterns of injustice. That said, it could just be, like I said, that they're in a bad mood. So you have to do a little bit of discerning of how much you hold the complaints, you hold them in tenderness, but maybe not in letting them overrun the purpose of the meeting. So a few techniques suggest that people give direct feedback and where that feedback should go. So if people are complaining about something, especially if they're complaining about it in a circle of people that have nothing to do with the thing they're complaining about, suggesting where those concerns should go is much more helpful than giving it a lot of space in this setting. And in particular, don't let yourself get triangulated into things where you take somebody else's complaints to where they should have gone. Now, if somebody is feeling disempowered and direct feedback is hard for them to do, you can offer support to them in giving their feedback. Would you like me to go with you to tell so-and-so this issue? But it's really unhelpful for you to let yourself get triangulated into the point where you're now conveying their words for them. Yeah. The other technique that is helpful is, again, to note, document, and pivot. And this is especially helpful if it is a complaint that you do have some power or control over, is go ahead and say, that sounds really hard. We're going to take a note of what happened, and we're going to make sure that it's documented for later. And this meeting doesn't have capacity to become about this, so we're going to get back to our agenda, but this is noted for later. So that can help you stay on track without completely shutting down a person. With the caveat, if you say you're going to take care of it later and you wrote it down, you better come back to it later, right? It's not okay to be like, well, we put it in the complaint box. And guess what? No one ever reads anything that was put in the complaint box, right? So we do have to come back to it. Thoughts or questions about dealing with complaints? For the ram. Oh, yes. Ask the Rambler to be the timer. Yeah. Yeah. Good suggestion. Yeah. All right. Anything else about complaining? Okay. All right. So here's our last difficult type of participant that we will be talking about. And this is, we're calling them the slacker. But there's so many reasons why somebody might be perceived as a slacker, right? There's so many reasons why somebody might be struggling to follow through on their share of the work or what they said they were going to do. It could be that, it turned out they weren't given the tools they needed. Turned out they weren't given the information or the access that they needed to do it. It could be that they thought they could do it and now a whole bunch of other stuff has come up. They could be a chronic yes person who overfills their plate so much, speaking as a chronic yes person, that they're like, sure, I have capacity to do that. Of course I can. And then they're like, ooh, crap. So there's a lot of reasons why a person might be perceived as the slacker on the team. And when you are in leadership and you want to work with your slacker, these can be helpful to identify what they need in order to complete the task. So, do you have a key card to get into the building? Do you have the password to access the system that we're using? Do you have the notes from last year's volunteer organizer? What are the things you need and how do I make sure that you have them? You can partner them with somebody else for accountability. And this is a little different than partnering them with somebody else who's going to end up having to do all of their work. It's not well, why don't you have co-leaders and really you're expecting the co-leader to do everything. Rather, it seems like having an accountability buddy might be helpful. What if the two of you plan to check in with each other a week before the deadline to see how each of your stuff is going, and then that's going to help you each get it done before we get to the next meeting or something like that. Be really tender in how you do all of this, because people who know that they're not completing their tasks, they know they're not completing their tasks, and it is embarrassing and it doesn't feel good. So do all of this in ways that are tender and helpful and don't shame people. The other thing that can be really helpful for everyone is that you document in the meeting notes all of the action items that are coming out of that meeting and who is going to do them, and that you send that out in the notes. So it's not, it's not so general as something like, we will get the budget before next month. It's action item, budget, who's doing it, Jim, deadline, X. That clarity really helps people. And if they forgot what they said yes to, it's right there in the notes. And then the other thing, while this does add extra work to the leader or the note taker or whoever takes this on, is that you can send out reminders to people so that you're helping them not end up coming to a meeting where on the agenda it's like, report out about that thing you were supposed to do. And you get to that item on the agenda and you're like, oh crap, I didn't do it, right? So when you send out the reminder a week ahead of time, you can say, reminders, We're going to hear from Jim about the budget. We're going to hear from Sue about the plant sale. And that helps people follow through on what they said they were going to do. Yeah. And if that does feel like a lot of work to send reminders, if you had action items in your notes, it can be as simple as copy and paste the action items into the reminder email. Here's the action items from last month's meeting. Make sure you've done them before you come to next month's meeting. Yeah. So comments, questions? Yeah, Carvin, online? Back to the complainer. Yeah. What if the complaints are directed towards you or the subject of the meeting? Yeah, that can be a little tricky. I mean, we all feel a little threatened when the complaints are directed at us. So that's a chance for practicing some self-differentiation. This, people can complain about me without it being an attack against me. People cannot agree with me without it meaning that they hate me. These little reminders that we can give to ourselves. And it's still a chance to still do the note, document, and pivot. Because you can say, thank you for bringing that to my attention, that you don't like the way I have done X. I'm going to make a note of it. It's not something that I can process in the midst of a meeting. I'm going to need some time to think about that and work on that elsewhere. So I'm going to take a note and we're going to get back to what we were doing, but I am going to reflect on this. And that's perfectly valid. I mean, if you've just received a complaint about yourself saying, I can't process this right now, but I will come back to it later. Again, that does mean that you have to come back to it later. And you can come back to the person and say, I thought about it, and I hear you, and I still think the way I'm doing it is the way I want to do it. Or, I've thought about it, and I hear you, and I don't have capacity to completely change my personality. I'm still the person I am. So how can we work together anyway? So those are ways that you can do it if the complaint is about you. If it is about the subject of the meeting, then you have a judgment call. Is it an important complaint that needs to be addressed in this meeting? And we'll get into some of that more with conflict, because this is where we get into a conflict situation. Or is it that you, again, want enough time to think about it and come back later? And if you want time to think about it, thank you, I hear you, I'm writing it down, I need time, I will come back to you later. Yeah. Anything else about any of these three difficult participant types that we've talked about? Okay, then we're going to conflict. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so conflict. Here's a quote from Nelson Mandela. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is an environment where all can flourish. So the goal here, it would be completely unrealistic for us to never have conflict. Guess who never has any conflict? Like people who are completely under control, cults, and dead people. Yeah, those are the only ones who never have conflict. Yeah, I mean, we're living, thinking, feeling, complicated, flawed human beings who want to do important things and disagree on how to get there. So of course we're going to have conflict. The trick is that we want our conflict to be healthy, right? We want to have healthy conflict, and we want to stay out of the side that is unhealthy conflict. So healthy conflict looks like exchanging ideas, and you can have differences of opinion, but you're exchanging those differences and hearing both sides. It looks like mutual respect. So everybody is holding everyone else in respect, including themselves. It looks like cooperation to move toward resolution. So no one is digging in their heels and saying, no, we're not going anywhere from here, we're just gonna stay here. Everybody's saying, how do we move through this conflict to an identified resolution? And it looks like emotional regulation on all people's parts. So everyone is doing the work to keep themselves emotionally regulated. That doesn't mean they're not feeling feelings, because emotional regulation doesn't mean that you're not angry, that you're not sad, that you're not frustrated, etc. It means that as you're feeling those feelings, you're processing them in a way that lets you continue to act according to your values and intentions and not be driven into harmful actions by those feelings. So that's healthy conflict, and if we're there, then we can keep working on the problem, the conflict. Where we run into trouble is when we get into unhealthy conflict. So if we move into communication breakdowns, people literally don't understand what other people are saying. They're using words in different ways. They mean different things. They're not hearing each other. Now we just are spiraling in communication breakdown zone, and that's unhealthy. Mismatched expectations. So you can't get to a common resolution if your expectations are so far apart that there's no overlap, no convergence. So, an example of that would be if somebody wanted an event to be small and intimate with like 5 people max, and somebody else wanted it to be like a carnival, the expectations are really far apart. And not that you can't find some middle ground between 5 people and 1,000 people, but it's going to be hard to find that because the expectations are so far apart. Then lack of respect, of course, means that you're in unhealthy conflict. Lack of respect breaks down the way that we treat each other. And lack of emotional regulation. So when people aren't emotionally regulated, now they're not in their thinking brains anymore. They're in their reptile brain survival mode, and they start to act in ways that aren't in alignment with their intentions. Any questions or comments here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, with regard to expectations, expectations can be a pretty broad range of things, right? So I think your example sounded like a goal, maybe for a project. Are you including the whole other range? Personal expectations, the slacker is going to do their part, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, and thank you for lifting that up. Yeah, expectations is covering a really broad range of possibility here. It could also actually be mismatched assumptions, that we started from a different assumption than the other person started from. So there's so many different ways that it could be that when you try to get to the Venn diagram zone of what you want and what I want, that there's just nothing in the middle. Yeah.
I wanted to comment that this too can be addressed in the covenant, that the purpose of our communication is to keep it healthy, so that we all recognize that the possibility of unhealthy conflict isn't getting us anywhere. So if we can start with that as an expectation for the group, that may be helpful.
Yeah, covenants that's our number one tool. And remember, if you didn't put it in the covenant to begin with, it's never too late to add it. So you run into some difficulty, your group isn't processing well, you can go back to your group covenant and say, I think we might need some other agreements with each other. Yeah. When emotions are running high, any suggestions? i.e., let's take a break to regroup. Absolutely, I've got several suggestions, and I do have a little bit later a slide about emotional co-regulation. But what you're suggesting right there, Linda, of let's take a break to regroup is one of those tools of of emotional regulation. There's a whole bunch of tools that you can have in your toolbox to help people emotionally regulate. And ultimately, you can't regulate for anyone else. So there's tools that can help, and people got to do their own work. And when one is not able to regulate emotions during the conversation, what do you recommend for next steps to continue conflict management? Set a time to circle back. Yes, 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 yes. If you are not able to regulate emotions during the conversation, and this is particularly something that people should check in with themselves. If you're not regulating your emotions, it is time to put a pause. It is time to say, I'm not able to process right now. I'm not able to continue this in the way with the intentionality that I want to have. So we're going to come back later with some more tools to help. And that tool might just be that I am now calm. That tool might be another person to help, etc. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Arlene.
I'm not familiar with using these terms like regulate emotions. Are you talking about people getting stressed out?
Thank you for calling me on the assumption of the language. Yeah, so absolutely. So regulation, co-regulation, stress regulation, these are all these words that now are being basically used for how you cope with the emotions that you're feeling. So yeah, people get stressed out, or people are super angry, and they lose it. Yeah. And saying that you're emotionally regulated is saying that you're feeling those feelings still. So it's not like we used to kind of have this model of stop feeling angry, stop feeling stressed. And so the change in vocabulary around this is really around the idea that people can't just stop feeling something, right? But when we are like healthy and in this sort of control zone of regulation, we have the feelings, but we consciously are still in control of ourselves and how we act on our feelings. So that's what that really means to say regulation. Yeah. James.
That makes me think that it's a matter of taking responsibility for my emotions rather than unloading them on the group or an individual.
It is a form of taking responsibility for your emotions, yeah. And it's also, I mean, in many ways it's very Buddhist. It's, I have the anger, but I am not being the anger. This is the wave, but it's not the whole ocean. And how do I hold these things in a way that honors others and myself? So I wouldn't just say take responsibility. I'd also say, you know, give yourself some grace and ease also around the feelings that you have. Feelings aren't bad. They just are. They're reactions to something. There's a part of you, your brain, your body, that is reacting. But do we want to be reactive, or do we want to be proactive in the ways that we act in the world? So, yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about these ways to manage conflict. They are active listening, clear communication, emotional co-regulation, which is, yeah, we'll get more into each of them. Yeah, right now I'm just listing them, but we're going to get into each one. Empowerment, change management, and consensus building. So the first one, active listening. Active listening is you giving the other person the signals that tell them that they're being listened to, at the same time that you actually are listening to them. So I want to lift up that some people learn to give the signals of active listening, but they're still not actually listening. So active listening isn't just make good eye contact and nod your head. Because we could do that while we're still thinking about our grocery list. do the things, but also actually be listening. So focus on a person. If you want to shut your computer, put down your notes, make it clear that you're really focusing on this person now, really look at them. If eye contact is something that they're comfortable with and that works for you, make eye contact with them. Not all people are, and that's okay. But putting down all the other distractions and giving them open body language that says that you're receptive. It's acknowledging, so, it could be something as simple as, yes, or it can be, that sounds really hard. But acknowledging what they're saying, reflecting, what I heard you say was, clarifying, I just want to be sure I actually understand you. Is this what you meant, or could you tell me more about that? And it's being curious. So you actually care about them, you actually care to understand them. So it's not a passive thing to do to listen, it's a very active thing to do to listen. You're really extending yourself towards this other person with the goal of understanding them and having them feel understood, which is a really powerful feeling for people. When they feel really heard, that's very powerful for people. So that's one way that we can help manage conflict, is that we actively listen to really understand everyone. Any questions or thoughts about active listening? Got one online? So just want to add here that focusing too much on emotional regulation can cause a lot of anxiety, which in itself is hard to regulate. Like you said, I think sometimes it's important to just be angry with respect. Yeah, no, it's kind of a form of gaslighting yourself to say, no, there's nothing to be angry about here. Why am I angry? I shouldn't be angry. I should stop being angry. No, just feelings are not wrong. Feelings are a reaction, and you can get curious about your own feelings. Why am I angry? What is this in response to? What is this feeling telling me? What do I need right now? Oh, I didn't eat before this meeting. Or, oh, this is totally out of our values, and that's why I'm angry. Get curious about your own reactions too. Yeah, anything else? All right. So clear communication. Clear communication, I think we all think that we know what clear communication is, but this is one where assumptions really come around to bite us in the butt. Because if we're assuming that we're making clear communication, people walk away with different ideas. So one thing is that you can actually do a check-in or a check-out and ask every participant in a meeting to say what they're taking away as an understanding from it. This could take time, but if you have chronically mismatched understandings, this is time well spent. Because when somebody says, I'm taking away from this meeting that we've all agreed to never wear the color purple in the building ever again, and everyone else says, whoa, 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 where'd that come from? We never agreed to that. That's a good chance to catch it before it turns into a chronic misunderstanding. And then putting it in writing. So we underrate the importance of the note taker. The note taker is a super important job because once you have it in writing, that is the record of what you agreed to. That is the record of what people said. And the note taker can put a spin on things that so a lot of times more formal groups have this process of approving the minutes, and a lot of people don't even bother to read the minutes before they approve them. They're just like, oh yeah, sure, I'm sure that's fine. No. This is a really important spot in the process of working together as people, is what did you actually say? What did you actually agree on Because there's nothing worse than later somebody saying, well, the way I remember it is, and then somebody else says, well, that's not the way I remember it. I mean, how many times have we been in that conversation? I have a memory that nobody else has, right? So then you go back to the notes. And that clear communication is often needs to be written communication or recorded in some other way. Yeah, Arlene.
I was going to add that during our board meetings, the secretary will stop someone right after we have decided or discussed something and said, so just a minute, so I get this accurate, let me read you what I wrote. And then we correct the minutes right there while the meeting is still going.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. Sue.
So in a family conflict, not a meeting, text messaging is the note. It's good to have it in text messages.
Yeah, no, that's true. If it's a family conflict or family communication, yeah, text each other, put something in writing. We had this conversation and we agreed to this. Here it is in writing in case we forget later. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So now we get to this emotional co-regulation thing. So emotional co-regulation is the idea that we pick up off of other people's emotional state. So if you're angry and other people are also angry, it can build everyone's anger, right? It starts to escalate and enforce each other. If you're angry and another person is very calm, it can bring you to calm also. Now I say can because it's not always going to work. It's not a 100%, right? And it is entirely possible that you, in your effort to be a good emotional co-regulator, will meet something like this. I'm being really calm right now, and I think that we need to, and they'll be like, I can't believe you're being, that's so talking down to me. What do you think you are? You're so much better than me with your I'm calm. No, it's making me very angry that you're so calm, right? Imagine that scenario. Right, so emotional co-regulation can be a wonderful way for human beings to feed off of each other in an emotional reactivity loop of I encounter calm, it brings me to calm. It can be that you just manage to stay calm and the other person storms. And that might happen. It's still valuable for you to be calm because storm plus storm equals megastorm, right? So the goals of emotional co-regulation and the process of them start with yourself. You recognize that feelings are heightened. And it might be that you recognize it because you're suddenly feeling really heightened feelings, or it might be that you just recognize other people's behavior as being really heightened emotionally. And so your first step is to check in with yourself. First step is, what am I feeling and how do I get to calm and non-anxious? And maybe you can't, and that's okay. If you're really threatened, if you're unsafe, if you're really triggered, maybe you can't. And that's the time to say, I can't process this right now, we need to pause. If you can't regulate yourself, call a pause. But if you can regulate yourself, breathe, ground, find your center, find your non-anxious presence. And a non-anxious presence is, I am here with you and I am not anxious about it. I am not anxious about my presence with you. I am calm, I am open to you, I am neither protected, controlling, or anxious. None of those things. And if you can accomplish that, and again, no shame if you can't. If you can't, that just means that you aren't, pause and stop. But if you can accomplish that you have regulated yourself, Now notice to the group out loud. I'm noticing heightened emotions. I noticed that I just had to take 3 deep breaths. I noticed that people seem very angry, or people seem very anxious, or seem very afraid. A lot of people, when they're activated emotionally, don't recognize it until somebody notices it for them. So just notice it out loud. Then some self-disclosure can be really helpful. I just had to take 3 breaths. I was feeling really anxious as this unfolded, and I had to ground myself. You know. And then invitational. And it's important for it to be invitational and not prescriptive and controlling, because nobody wants to be prescribed a solution, controlled by somebody else, shamed by somebody else about how they're feeling. So make it invitational. Would everyone be comfortable taking a 5-minute pause? We'll all go run around the building and shake and, really shake it out, and then we'll come back. Or would everyone be willing to do a little breathing meditation together? Or whatever you're inviting people into, but make it invitational. So this is kind of a big new topic. So questions, thoughts?
I want to address first the self-regulation for myself. I think my first step would be to recognize that we've been using the term anxious. I would say afraid. I'd call it fear. And then as a note to myself, I would want to investigate why I was afraid. And the final one, the invitational one, perhaps I could ask for suggestions. How can we lighten this up?
Yeah, those are great thoughts, James. Yeah, be curious about why you're having the feelings you're having. It is telling you something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to a meeting pretty soon, and I have some suggestions for some things. I'm wondering how I could bring that up to people, because I'm afraid, and this is my fault too, I'm afraid there's going to be a complete no on what I'm trying to say, or people are going to poo-poo me. I don't know exactly how to do it, and I'm not sure I know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not knowing the whole scenario, I have a few possibilities that come to mind. So and your mileage may vary, depends on the setting, depends on you. But things that might help, depending on how you relate to this group, is it could be really powerful to do some self-disclosure around that. It could be that saying, the thought of bringing this up has made me afraid, and so I've got a lot of fear around this, and I do need to still bring it up with you. So, and this again, this completely depends on whether you have a trusting, caring relationship, like what the scenario is, the setting. But self-disclosure could be really helpful. It could be that in a scenario like that having an ally ahead of time could be helpful for helping you bring up something that's hard to bring up. So getting a buddy who is either willing to, just be there next to you for support, or willing to amplify your points and say, yeah, me too. The value of just a me too is huge. So having an ally could help. Putting it in writing so that if you do find yourself emotionally dysregulated and having a hard time ordering your thoughts, you can go back to what you wrote down. That could be really helpful too. So those are 3 things that come to mind right off the top of my head. And it's always contextual, so it depends. But those might be 3 helpful tools. Yeah, Arlene.
I have another one when you really want someone to say yes. instead of asking for the yes right then, so we can ask for, what's the path to yes? What do I have to do? What's the right steps to take so that you do feel comfortable saying yes to this proposal?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion also. Thank you, Arlene. Anything else? Okay. This one might be the most difficult step in the whole thing. Just practice, and if it doesn't work, that doesn't mean that it's not worth trying again. Yeah. So then empowerment. This is important because in conflict, it's not always a neutral playing field. It's not just about logical disagreement about ideas. There is power and privilege and identity present in your group, every group. There's never a group that doesn't have power, privilege, and identity present within it. So, if you are holding healthy conflict space, it's really important for you to remember that everyone needs to be empowered, especially the ones who didn't have power when you started this conversation. So be mindful of power and privilege. Be aware that different participants have different identities. And here's the thing about identities, we can't assume them when we look at people. So we don't know what power and privilege everyone has or what identities everyone is holding. We don't know who's a trauma survivor. We don't know who is a recovering addict. We can't even assume that we know what race people are by looking at them or what gender they are, right? So be aware of it, but don't make assumptions. Yeah, Pat, did you have something? No? Okay, it was a yes. All right. And then we need to make steps making sure that all are heard. Not that all had a chance to speak, that all were heard. You see the difference between that? So make sure everyone gets a chance to be heard and to contribute. And that might mean that you end up doing a lot of amplifying and reinforcing for people that aren't being heard. It might mean that as you go through it, you say, it seems like people aren't hearing so-and-so. I heard this, so-and-so, would you like to say it again and make sure that we're hearing you? Right? If you're not the leader and you think that somebody's not getting heard, that's when you can practice the me too or the yes, go, and the amplification of if somebody says something and other people don't seem to be hearing it, you can add your voice and say, I also want to affirm what so-and-so just said. That was a really important point that I want to make sure everybody heard. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So empowerment in conflict is really important. Otherwise, we're not solving conflict, we're just oppressing people. Yeah. Oh, actually, I should stop here. Thoughts, questions? Anybody want to say anything? Karen's ready with the microphone. So we're, for the folks online, we have a comment that's saying that Karen is just very cute with her readiness with the microphone. Yeah. And thank you very much for your help. Sorry. All right, one for James and then we'll.
From the Me Too thing, I think all of us in any group need to take responsibility of leadership in that we address when we don't think something is heard, that we step out and say, could we get clarification on this? Or are you satisfied that you are heard? And seek out that confirmation.
Yeah, shared responsibility. Whether you're the identified leader or not, we all can work on these things. Yeah. And Jack, you had one?
I don't know if it was covered because I wasn't here for the first one, but the person that interrupts another person's conversation or another person's story, I have to admit that I'm guilty of that. But just a couple nights ago, we were having a discussion, a group of us, and one of the people was trying to express their thoughts on a particular subject, and two other people at the table kept interrupting in the middle of the sentences. And I finally reached a point where I couldn't stand it. I said, why don't you guys just be quiet and
Yeah.
let him say what he wants to say? And I don't know if that's the right way to handle it, but this was an informal group, and I figured, well, somebody's got to say something.
Yep. Yeah. That sounds like a great way to handle it in an informal group. And yeah, we didn't cover interruptions in the previous training. Interruptions, honestly, as a facilitator, I just don't want to tolerate interruptions. And people, it could be in your covenant, it could be in your agreement. And also, you can just model that if somebody starts to interrupt, you can say, sorry, you interrupted. You can be next. I want to go back to the person who was speaking. Interruptions they're not listening, they're only talking. And our goal here is to talk and listen. So, yeah, Alice.
I would just modify that a little bit because I think oftentimes people get energized in a conversation or a discussion, and you want to jump in there and say something, and if you label that as an interruption, that person might not share their thoughts.
Yeah, no, and that's true, Alice, and thank you for that. That it could just be excitement. And so, then just saying, oh, you might not have realized, but somebody else wasn't finished yet. Can you hold your thought? Yeah. And maybe people can't, and they might be like, can you write it down? Yeah, Jack?
It's also dealing from a position of power. Who has the most power in the group? And sometimes you have to rein that power in.
Yeah. There is a pattern that people with more power are more likely to interrupt people with less power. Yeah.
I come from a family of aggressive speakers and interrupters. And outside people taught me that that's rude. And here we have a microphone, but a talking stick works well too. It's a very nice tool. And I like it because if I've interrupted, somebody holds the stick and all I can do is apologize.
Yes. And you've reminded me by saying that you come from a family of aggressive talkers. There's cultural differences too. So different cultures, different backgrounds, and different identities and power and privilege make a person more or less prone to interrupting. Some cultures are more aggressive talkers. Others are so ingrained that they must never interrupt that they wait for a long pause to happen before they speak. So if you're trying to moderate a group that has both kinds of talkers in it, that's where we have to go back to some of our techniques that you can look back to last week's recording, but we talked about the dominators and the quiet ones, and those techniques can help with this. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, one more.
I would ask, isn't it legitimate for a leader to check in with members of the group if you observe that somebody is not speaking, or encourage them to voice their feelings and concerns?
So here's the trick with quiet ones. And we went into this with more depth last week. So I'm only going to do a little brief thing and suggest people look back at last week's recording. So people are quiet for many different reasons. And often putting a person on the spot when they're being quiet can shut them down even further. So I'll come back to the invitational thing. Be invitational, be tender, be caring, and try not to shame anyone for their behavior or their contribution or lack thereof. So I think it's fair to take a pause as a leader and be like, I just wanted to check in on our quiet people. Let's give you a little space if there's anything you want to add. Or to say, I just want to create a little space before we move on and make sure that we've heard from everyone who had something to say. So we're going to have silence for a little bit to let those who still might have something to say. So there's some tender ways to do it. But just saying like, Pat, you haven't said anything. Tell us something right now. That's not tender, and that kind of shuts down quiet people. But we talked about this a lot more last week, and some self-identified introverted quiet people shared what works for them. So there's some good stuff there. Yeah. All right. I'm going to move on. Again, we're going to be over time. My apologies. There's a lot in these things. So change management. I'm going to talk about this one quickly. But change management is a big thing. A lot of times conflict is actually just about discomfort around change. So you can manage a lot of conflict but just by managing change well so that it doesn't become conflict. Change management looks like learning to lean into capacity for flexibility, learning to be more flexible. And that's hard for everybody because whenever we hit the limits of our own capacity, that can hurt. But people have a certain capacity for change and flexibility, and we can encourage everyone to grow in that. It looks like being open-minded and curious. So encourage everyone to be curious about the possibilities as opposed to afraid of what might happen. And it can look like being willing to change again. So present things to people, not that we're going to change to this new thing and then that's forever. Rather that we're going to try this new thing, and if it doesn't work, we can either come back to the old way of doing it or we can change to something entirely different. But all of those are some effective ways to handle change management. All right. And I'm going to go on to consensus building. Consensus building it's not the only way that we come to decisions. Obviously, sometimes we vote on things, we use majority rules or whatever, or the conversation might not be going towards making a decision. But consensus building is an effective way to bring everyone on board, not leave anyone else behind. So we want to find common ground and identify those areas of agreement and focus on them rather than on the areas of disagreement. So we agree to disagree about the color purple, but we do agree that we want the facility to be safe for everyone, right? Focus on the areas of agreement. Focus on buy-in, so don't move on without getting everyone on board. And there's a lot of techniques for that, but essentially it's just that you're paying attention to the people in the room, in the circle. Are they on board with it or are they not? And you move at the speed of trust. So it's going to take the time that it takes because you're prioritizing relationships over quick solutions. So you can't get to quick, like, yes, everybody get on board if some people are feeling sick to their stomach about it still, right? So it might be slow, but it is going to be longer lasting and there's going to be less conflict or less unhealthy conflict. All right, so questions about consensus building or about change management or about anything that I covered here, because we are now at the end. Anybody have anything? Yeah, Alice.
I just like to think of consensus as, is this something you can live with? You know, for everybody to have that opportunity, because if you can't live with it, then you have more conversation
Yeah.
to go. But you may not be the one most enthusiastic about it.
Right. It may not be full enthusiasm, but it could be, yes, I can live with this. This is going to work. Yeah. Yeah. And Doug there.
The church has an interesting history with the restorative justice efforts in Thurston County. I just wanted to acknowledge Steve Tilley in person and the others who've worked with justice, not jails, over the years, because the system has changed in this county, because people we know stood up at meetings, and there's training available for conflict resolution, and there's a cadre of people trained in it to work with the juvenile system, and some kids are actually being able to hear the person that was hurt by what they did in a positive environment where they can realize, wow, I really screwed up. I don't want to do, you know. So it's around us, and there'd be opportunities for people, and yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for lifting that up. Yeah, restorative and transformative justice circles and processes are an incredible alternative to punitive control mechanisms. And there are people who have taken those trainings. I also want to lift up that we have a healthy congregations team here at OUC, and they are working on healthy processes for managing conflict as well. So when we run into conflict that we don't feel we can manage, and that we feel like it's in the unhealthy zone, there are resources to reach out for help. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Anything online, Carbon? Just a thank you. All right. There's some. Okay. When addressing people who are not emotionally regulated, it is helpful to bring yourself to just a little calmer and more positive than they are, but show you understand where they are coming from and then move to more calm and positivity. I really like the way you framed that, Nathaniel. Yeah. Yeah, and that because you're still relatable. If you're just a little bit calmer than they are and not, like I said before, I am so calm. What's wrong, Dave? Dave, are you upset? Like, you don't have to be robotic with them. You can be like, yeah, this is hard stuff. You know, and then you can be like, let's take some breaths together. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, you've got your own mic.
I'll just say something that I've been practicing with is if I have something to say to somebody that might be difficult, I pretend that I'm talking to my very best friend in the whole world and offering them a suggestion that I think would be helpful.
Oh, that's really sweet. Yeah. Yeah, just envisioning, and there's other ways to do that too. You could like envision them as a beloved of the divine, as a soul being, as your best friend, and just that way to remind yourself that whatever works for you. Again, your mileage may vary, but a way to remind ourselves that it's a person. It's a person. And they may be flawed and we may be frustrated with them, but they have their inherent worth and dignity also, and we can be tender with them. Yeah. All right. We're going to end there. I thank you for your patience. Both of these trainings, both weeks, we went over time. So since I put this together intending it to be one training, clearly I had way too much to say about this. And thank you so much. The recording for this one will be posted. And next week, we will be back with a completely different forum on discernment questions for how we know which actions, which faith in action or justice actions are in alignment with our values and right for us, and which aren't. And so that'll be a lovely forum and conversation next week as well. So with that, I extinguish our chalice. and extend you my gratitude. May we carry the light of faith and commitment with us until we meet again. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sara.